I'll push back on the notion of nothing would be overridden, right? I mean, I personally don't know if there's a bill that I've seen thus far that I would say, okay, well, this is a really good idea and we should work together on this. But I mean, I think I've demonstrated that I'm absolutely willing to do that. It just depends on what the shared outcome that we're trying to achieve is. I mean, and I haven't had anyone approach me this year and say, hey, I want to help on this and I want to see if we can come together and work on something that would be override proof. No one has asked me that question. And I don't necessarily think the governor is going to veto everybody's bill just because of everybody's name on it. But we'll see.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Alaska State House Representative for East Fairbanks, Will Stapp. This is his second appearance on the podcast. To learn more about Will's early life and his time in the military, check out his first appearance on the show. There's a link in the show notes. Today, Will and I talk about the chance for increased education funding this year, Alaska's therapeutic court system, and the elections bill that just passed the Alaska State House and Senate. Will Stapp, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew Gray. It's always a privilege to be here, you know.
So it's been an interesting couple of weeks in the building.
Yeah,
and
so far so good, you know.
Yeah, you have figured prominently.
Have I?
Yes, you have. And, you know, I'll just jump right into it. You're in the minority caucus. I'm in the majority caucus. The narrative in our caucus from some folks is that Will Stapp is just causing problems to create problems. He's just making things more difficult.
Oh, I don't have the power, though. How do I do that?
Point of orders, rising to questions in finance. I don't know. People don't like to be questioned.
Yeah, but I mean, you want a transparent process, right? And again, when you're in the minority, all you really can do ultimately is ask questions and try to put a little sunlight on things, I think, you know? And I wouldn't say it's been, I mean, compared to, I mean, you and I have been here 4 years now. I mean, we've seen, I would argue, much more, call it dilatory behavior, you know? But, you know, my perspective is really simple, you know? I mean, you work with the tools that you have, and asking questions or pointing out things is kind of the only tool I have right now, right?
So we'll go in reverse chronological order.
Okay.
Let's talk about the operating budget, which is currently being debated in finance right now.
Sure.
What are your concerns about the current state of the operating budget?
Oh, I think we're spending too much money in the current operating budget, you know.
Where is too much money being spent?
Well, I think you got to be careful. Oh, well, actually, we'll start very bluntly. I mean, the amount of money for another super large increase in education, I think, is very dangerous because you do not have the long-term revenues to sustain the funding increase to education unless you're willing to pass a tax bill or unless you're willing to cut the budget, right? It's kind of the same position we were in last year when we had a bill that was substantially more education funding than the one we ended up passing, right? So nothing really has materially changed other than the oil price is higher this year.
And this has come up in the building that a lot of the pressure to increase education funding is coming from South Central Alaska.
Yeah,
from
Anchorage
and Matsu. Yeah. To put it bluntly, Fairbanks made the terrible draconian cuts a few years ago.
Yeah. No, we closed schools and
closed schools have really high teacher to student ratios, lots of kids in the classrooms. And, you know, like, do you think we should fix that? Like what's happening in Fairbanks classrooms?
You know, I mean, I supported the education bill, you know, last year and voted override the governor on the education bill because I think you can say two things are true at the same time. Like you can want to support something and you can also be mindful that you do got to work within your revenue and expenditure liabilities. You know, I mean, I think in terms of this year, I mean, if you're going to try for another big increase to education funding, the odds of you having to rug pull that money next year are incredibly high. I mean, unless people are willing to reduce the budget in other areas, that currently the CSD operation does not reduce the budget in other areas. It adds substantial spending, fund capitalization, and other items, you know, Medicaid recommendations, stuff like that.
Well, you just mentioned a moment ago that in order to be sustainable, we either need new revenue
or cuts.
Correct.
Right.
Which do you support?
I Obviously, I like cutting things. I think I make that pretty clear. I bills that cut.
You feel like budget's too big. As years go by and inflation goes up, our budget should be going down.
No, I wouldn't say that. I just think if you want to be a good fiduciary, you should always try to look for ways for government to operate more efficiently. Okay. Now, government will always not fully be an efficient system. It's not. I mean, you and I were both in the military. It is the definition of not efficient. But you should still make an attempt to do things like eliminate programs that no Alaskans are on, which I have bills.
You've tried to do, I know, but I guess like what I would say is that should we eliminate programs that no one's using? Should we eliminate administrators that don't really work 40 hours a week and don't really need to be there? Absolutely. Unnecessary positions should be eliminated. But at the end of the day, inflation is a real thing.
Sure.
And I'm not innovative in making this statement, but it just seems like that we accept that the DOC budget should go up over time.
I don't.
But I mean, most folks look, different departments, it's just assumed like, yes, they're going to need an inflation adjustment as the years go by. But education, for some reason, seems to always be off to the wayside, and they're asking for too much. Even when you look at the numbers, it would just be controlling for inflation.
Yeah, so two things can be true at the same time, right? You can certainly make the argument that costs have increased. That's true argument, right? I first came to Alaska in 2006. It is exponentially more expensive to live here than it was in 2006, for example. And you can also say just because we have created a budgetary system where we just allow for kind of unchecked programmatic increases in funding, that doesn't mean we should do that. In my opinion, what we should do is we should look at our programmatic spending in ways that really measure efficacy. So, for example, what does the money you spend do? Where does it go? And how many people are actually benefiting from the program? And if you start to kind of break down programmatic spending in that mindset, you can honestly take a look at things the state spends money on and say, okay, is this a wise use of our money, or should we cut this program and put money in education, for example? And the reason you want to do that is because, we are all elected by the people. And my opinion is people elect us to spend the revenues we have as wisely as possible. I don't think anyone, Republican or Democrat, wants people willfully wasting, money on inefficient programs, right? And until you start to change the way you budget, you can use different types of zero basing or just looking at programmatic spending and measuring outcomes of programmatic spending, you're not going to be able to answer the question, right? So I think the issue with the legislative budget process is even people who want to cut spending can't really tell you exactly where they want to cut spending because it's not super transparent of programmatic outcomes. You know what I mean?
So and this will actually give us a way to pivot to talk about one of your bills, but for me, we have 4,500 people incarcerated in Alaska.
Yeah.
It's a high per capita incarceration rate.
Correct.
I have asked these questions. I don't have the answers yet about what percentage of our prison population spent time in OCS, what percentage spent time at juvenile justice. I believe that we could do better by investing money upstream. I think the idea about our infant learning program, and we have good results from that, where those kids don't go into special ed. Special ed is 13 times more expensive than regular ed for public school. Federal mandates saying that these services must be provided. Our public education system must find a way to provide this extraordinarily expensive education. If we invest money upstream and a third of those kids from the ILP program end up not going into special ed, we're saving money. I believe pre-K, I'm saying this part out loud, people never want to refer to public education as a childcare system, but effectively it is. If kids are in pre-K, you're not paying for their childcare, which we know is extraordinarily expensive. Kids who go through pre-K do better in kindergarten than kids that didn't go to pre-K. So to me, I think it might cost us more money now, but we will save money if we've got a smaller prison population, if we've got people who are working and doing well. And you know what? Maybe providing their kids in the future better childhoods than the ones that they had.
Yeah. So I don't think you and I are that far apart on the way we are looking at cost structure. I'm not opposed to investing in things that prevent costly outcomes, right? So we would call this like bending the cost curve in money, right? So we'll take your ILP example, right? Let's say,
I'll say for listeners again, the infant learning program, which is for kids from age 0 to 3.
But so let's just take infant learning program and we'll kind of game this out. Let's say for every $1 million you spend on an infant learning program, you end up reducing the SPED multiplier for the base student allocation by $2 million. Right. By the way,
that's the cost savings.
Those are just hypothetical numbers.
And I think the very conservative hypothetical numbers. I think it probably is a bigger savings.
Exactly. Okay. So like, I'm not opposed to doing those things. And I think you'll find that a pretty consistent voting record. One of the things I did in my first year in the legislature is I amended a bill on Medicaid to increase the amount of postpartum women who are eligible.
You did. It was an awesome bill. Awesome amendment.
Yeah. And the reason you do that is because, one, you don't want to put up unnecessarily barriers to people having kids. And two, it's a big cost savings for the state to not kind of deal with that stuff long term, so it's a win-win for everybody. I always approach kind of every problem in that vein. And the real ask is just, okay, well, we're all here. We have excellent resources. And when it comes to programmatic spending, like we have the ability to kind of look at the ROI on those things. And that's really, in my opinion, how we should make decisions. And you can apply that to cutting things too, right? We can cost shift back to corrections. We did a lot of things, upgrades in the Department of Corrections, mainly to like healthcare stuff, prison population, for example. And the argument was if we invest in those things, the cost per prisoner would go down. That has not happened. I mean,
100%. Don't get me started. Yeah. We have something called geriatric parole. Mm-hmm. We've heard from DOC that the older a prisoner is, the higher their healthcare costs. Mm-hmm. The biggest driving cost factor in why DOC costs more and more is healthcare costs.
Sure.
If we have old people in prison, there's a program to let them out. Every study under the sun has showed that the older someone is, the less likely they are to reoffend. 80-year-olds don't commit crimes at the rate they did when they were 30. And we literally had a 91-year-old who had terminal cancer. He was denied parole. It's like, what was that 91-year-old with terminal cancer going to do? You were trying to punish him?
It's going to cost us a lot of money.
It's going to cost us a lot of money.
Yeah. And my other argument, and you're probably not going to agree with this one, is you just look for other places to send them out of state.
So I think, actually, I'll go there. This is not where I plan to go, okay. But I have had discussions with folks about whether or not a state with a population of 760,000, which our entire state population is smaller than a lot of cities in the lower 48. Yeah. And here's the deal. There are plenty of cities of 760,000 that don't have a maximum security prison. It wouldn't be logical to tell a city of 760,000 in California, which in California would be like a modest-sized city.
One of the 1,000 cities.
That they need to have their own maximum security prison. So I think that there's an argument to be made that a state of our size perhaps should not be funding and maintaining a maximum security prison like we have outside of Seward. Yeah. And so is there an argument to be made that we should close that facility down and not do that one? I think you could make a logical argument there.
Yeah, and then if you're willing to do both things, right? If you're willing to look at the scenario of, let's say, the 91-year-old with terminal cancer, and you say, okay, well, we obviously you got to evaluate these things on a case-by-case basis. But I'm inclined to agree with you. I would think a 91 with terminal cancer would pose a very low risk to the public.
I agree. Hey, so let's talk about your bill, because you have a bill in this vein, which is your Veterans Courts reformed to therapeutic. Mm-hmm. So we have a therapeutic court system in Alaska, a variety of courts, drug and alcohol court, Veterans Court. Your bill specifically has to do with Veterans Court. I'm going to say some numbers. They're going to be close to correct. They may not be absolutely correct. That we have spots for about 250 folks in some form of therapeutic court system in Alaska. We currently fill about 200 of those spots. I will state that when you hear from the therapeutic court system, they say that they have very good results. And these are people who have drug and alcohol, for most of the part, drug and alcohol abuse problems. They opt for an intensive program of drug and alcohol abuse treatment, as well as coming to court regularly to check in with the judge to make sure that they are showing up to their job, that they're not getting into trouble. And basically, when people graduate from that program, they tend to do very, very well. My question is, when you have 4,500 people in your prison system, and we know that a large percentage of them have drug and alcohol abuse problems, why are we only doing this for 200 people? And your bill is specifically dealing with veterans. So I guess tell us a little bit about your bill.
Yeah. So basically, we already have veterans courts in Alaska. And the primary thing that my bill does is right now, you have a system in which the district attorney or the prosecutor, for example, is basically the total arbiter and holds total veto power of whether or not a veteran gets to attend a veterans court or not. And, the court system is going to tell you, well, they have this reason and they have this criteria, but there is nothing that I can find, and I know you've looked at this, outside whatever they think that determines whether or not someone gets to go. And fundamentally, to me, it's like, okay, I like standards. Like, I'm a very regimented person, as you know. I understand that there's nuance in cases. So my bill is like, okay, well, for like low tier misdemeanors, so it's like a drug crime or an alcohol crime or something like that, why is that just not something? And if it's service connected and you can demonstrate that you just automatically have the opportunity to go into the therapeutic court, why is it an arbitrary process? So again, my bill, very simple.
Well, I can speak about the history of therapeutic courts in Alaska, and I can explain it. The bottom line is that in the early 2000s, when we basically started our therapeutic court system, prosecutors wanted that veto power. They were going to agree to this therapeutic court system if they had the power to not offer therapeutic court to the defendant. They don't have to tell you why. They can just literally say, don't want it offered to this particular defendant, and they don't have to give a reason. What we know from looking at therapeutic courts across the country is that that is not the gold standard way to have a therapeutic court system work. You should have a rubric. If people committed this crime, they meet these certain criteria, then they should be offered therapeutic court. And that should go for veterans. It should actually go for all of our therapeutic courts. This idea that prosecutors should have blanket veto power, no questions asked, is not what you see in states with gold standard therapeutic court systems.
Yeah. And again, I think kind of irrespective of whether you like the therapeutic court systems or not, keep in mind, we already have them in the state. And, the court folks didn't like when I said this at the hearing, because I said it's kind of a completely arbitrary process who gets to attend and who does not. And I know they didn't like that, but that is the definition of arbitrary, in my opinion, if someone has complete and total veto power and doesn't need to give you a reason.
Yeah. Hey, I have met folks through the reentry program who are out in the world doing well. These are smart people who have taken responsibility for the crimes that they committed as young people, as 20-year-olds, whatever, that are doing well now. These folks should have been offered therapeutic court. They were absolutely drug addicts at the time. They are sober now. They were never offered it. They have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And, look, Andrew, like for me, like I tell people, it's actually kind of a really difficult bill for me for a number of reasons. It's like last podcast. I mean, I don't, when I was a kid, my dad basically abandoned me because he was a drug addict, right? So I don't, on a personal level, I mean, like I've seen reentry and therapeutic courts obviously work for some people, but I'm just predisposed to think they don't work.
Well, and I go off on a tangent about this all the time. So my older brother died of drug and alcohol abuse at 43, which I was 26 when he died. I thought he was so old. Died at 43. He was forced to go to rehab multiple times.
Yeah, so
it never worked.
It never worked for him.
It never worked. And so, look, we need drug and alcohol treatment that works. I do think that we have pharmaceutical options in 2026 that we didn't have 20 years ago when my brother needed them, that make it hard for someone to get high, that reduce their cravings and their desire to use. And I think being open to medically assisted treatment is essential if we want to make a big difference. But I can't even say that would work for my brother because he probably wouldn't want it to work.
Yeah. So again, for me, it is kind of okay, so how do you want to make this decision? This is where like you have to kind of divorce your emotions sometime from the practical sense. Okay. So on a personal level, man, none of that stuff worked for my dad. Didn't care. I've never done any drugs in my entire life because of my father, But I said, okay, well, I've met people who this did work. Okay. So intellectually, even if I am very skeptical, to put it mildly, it has worked for some people. And where would those people be if they didn't have that option? That's the question. Would they be better or worse off? Almost certainly worse off. And they'll be the first people to tell you, okay. And ultimately, you want people to be productive members of society. And isn't really the purpose of a justice system punishment for the crime, right? And then the ability to make better decisions when you've paid your time to society, right?
100%. You want people to come out of prison better than they went in. And I think people say, well, what do you mean by better? And I would say able to support themselves, able to support their families.
Yeah, not be on
and a desire
and all those things.
A desire to not commit crimes.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And I think that you look at Arizona, you could basically go to community college in prison. You can basically take a full course offering. UAA has met with me and said, hey, we're willing to do virtual. We're willing to expand access. I think doing those sorts of things so that prisoners, or I should say inmates, I don't know, people in our criminal justice system are able to take advantage of programs so that when they leave, when they're done with their time, that they are able to do things that they couldn't do before they got there. That's helpful. Yeah. Hey, last thing I want to talk about with you today was the election bill.
Okay.
You and I, we had different perspectives on the bill before.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Your perspective was that it was disenfranchising military folk. My perspective was that there are two federal laws that prevent the disenfranchisement of the military, and that if this law is in conflict, federal law takes precedence. And this is the truth. When we're talking about rejected ballots, ballots that needed curing to be counted, the highest number came out of J-Bear. It's actually young guys in the military who can't fill out their ballot correctly.
Oh, and to be clear, my objection is not to the curing portion of the bill. I do not like when I hear an argument that I want to clean the voter rolls, and I look at the practical impact of the changes in state law. And you're correct that they can't remove them from the voting list because it's federal law, but the division can certainly move the voter's active status to inactive status. And the question is like, if you are moving a voter's status from active to inactive, are you making it easier or harder for them to vote?
Hey, but I'm going to push back on this because the reason why there is this major push to, quote, clean up the voter rolls is that is directly Donald Trump's language. He has promoted a narrative that if you've got 110% of eligible voters on your rolls, that means that there's a big problem. And I think that it's folks in your caucus that have internalized that debate and said, we're going to do something to clean up our voter rolls, and that we're going to expedite this procedure of putting people onto an inactive plane before they get removed. To be clear, we've had the Director of Elections and Judiciary the question over and over again, well, how do you get yourself off the inactive list? You vote, or you request an absentee ballot. That moves you from inactive to active. Yeah. So it seems like a pretty simple process to get off the inactive list. You just vote.
Yeah. Again, so obviously I think you should have transparent and clean voter rolls. Again, the umbrage of that I took in the bill is the provisions in the bill, all right, where you're changing the monthly status You're putting them over there if they do certain things that only a certain segment of the population are going to do. So who is going to leave this state and register their vehicle in another state disproportionately, right? That is people who serve in the active duty military, right? So when you see provisions like that in a bill, you ask yourself, okay, so who actually does these things? You know what I mean? And I would challenge anyone to tell me what subgroup of Alaskans are going to be leaving this state in 36 months after they get here and potentially voting absentee, registering their vehicles in another state. Because I can tell you exactly what kind of subgroup person does that.
Here's my pushback.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people in the military who don't vote. Like,
Same.
you know, so here's the thing. It's like this whole,
I also know
it's a
some who
very
do, though,
small proportion of folks who are voting in every election. Coupled with, are there folks who are like, you know, someday I want to move back to Alaska?
Sure.
Yes.
I was one of those people.
But there's a lot who don't know.
Correct.
And they're not going to make that decision for years.
Yeah.
And they might choose to register to vote in Texas, or choose to register to vote in Tennessee, or choose to register to vote in California, wherever they happen to be, and they're going to vote there. And you know what? They'll re-register to vote in Alaska when they've decided that that's where they want to be. So I think, like, in other words, spending a lot of time like trying to protect this very tiny minority of folks who are young and are moving with their military career, but want to vote absentee in Alaska. I just think that's really not the vast majority of folks on our rolls, for sure.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a subsection, a subgroup, but I mean, it's the people that I'm here to represent, right? I mean, I represent the second largest installation in the state outside of J-Bear. Fort Wayne is the largest military base in the state, right? And I will not vote for a bill that does anything to make those people, one, less likely to vote, or two, harder to vote. And the question is, and we can end on this too, I mean, like, you're right, there are certainly ways to get off the inactive voter status. But if you're moving somebody's active registration to inactive, are you making it harder or less likely for them to vote or not? And I would argue you're making it harder for them to vote. And also, like, a lot of these people, the only way they got registered was because they went and voted in a presidential election, and they had to cast a question ballot. The only person they could vote for was the president, because that's federal law. They have that entitlement. And they became Alaskan voters when they did that, right? They registered to vote by that process through the question ballot. So in 2 years from now, if they want to vote, or 3 years from now, if they want to vote for absentee or something like that, and they're on the inactive voter list, what does that look like, as opposed to just being on active status and getting the notifications from the direction and really getting the mail from the people?
Of course, I want to shift topics for the very last question, but I will just say what the director has told us is if they request that absentee ballot, that moves them from inactive to active. But I do want to ask about just the politics of Juneau at the moment. So that bill was basically negotiated in the Senate by Senator Bill Wielechowski.
Yes.
It was negotiated in the House by Representative Sarah Vance.
Yeah.
The hope is that you would have this conservative House member representing conservative values in this negotiation. You'd have the Democrat rules chair in the Senate sort of representing other values. And together they would come up with this collaborative compromise that would be palatable to both sides and signed by the governor. Do you think that they achieved their goal?
I don't know. We'll find out soon. I don't think so, but I don't know. I have no indication of what the governor's going to do or not do, you know.
I guess, like, if you could, hindsight's 2020, who do you think would have been better folks to negotiate that elections bill?
Man, that's a good question. I don't know. You know, look, here's my thing. I try to be a diligent person who reads a lot and does the best that they can, right? But I don't know jack about election law. I don't know anything about election law in the state. I'm not a lawyer, right? So I always kind of operate very mindful of my own limitations, right? And I don't know if you see that a lot in the building, like where, I mean, people, you know, always ask me and they say, oh, well, you're smart in this. And I said, look, I'll be the first person to tell you my main goal in life, Andrew, is I just don't like to get tricked by stuff I don't understand.
So there's a rumor going around, Will, that The governor will veto any bill sponsored by a House majority member or a Senate majority member.
Or probably a bill with my name on it too.
And there's a rumor that the minorities and neither body have any appetite for any veto overrides this year. So I'm just putting it out there. Let's say it's a rumor, maybe completely unfounded. But in a scenario where every majority bill will be vetoed, and just for folks who are listening, most of the bills that get the governor's desk are from the majority. Like that's the benefit of being the majority. And the minority is unwilling to override. I guess we pass a budget, but what's the value in us hanging around and passing a bunch of bills if every single one of them will be vetoed with no chance of override?
I'll push back on the notion of nothing would be overridden, right? I mean, I personally don't have the appetite to, I don't know if there's a bill that I've seen thus far that I would say, okay, well, this is a really good idea and we should work together on this. But I mean, I think I've demonstrated that I'm absolutely willing to do that. It just depends on what the shared outcome that we're trying to achieve is. Yeah, I mean, and I haven't had anyone approach me this year and say, hey, I want to help on this and I want to see if we can come together and work on something that would be override proof. No one has asked me that question.
I will ask for override proof for age of consent.
Yeah. I don't know why you would veto that bill, right? I mean, to be honest, I don't know. I mean, we'll see what it looks like when it comes back, right? Because that's the caveat, we don't know what the Senate's going to do to it. But, I don't necessarily think the governor is going to veto everybody's bill just because of everybody's name on it. I think that he didn't do that last year. I mean, yeah, he vetoes a lot of stuff, but he signed good bills into law that were
or let them go into law without being signed,
which is the same. Yep, I mean, yeah, okay. So yeah, there's you don't have the bill signing ceremony, but you achieved the outcome. And I would imagine on your bill, I don't know why the governor would veto something like that, but we'll see.
We'll see. Hey, any last thing you want to say to listeners?
Just always a pleasure to be on, and I'm glad I didn't have to recount my sad childhood this time.
People can go back and listen.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll stop. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Henry.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklog.gov or call 907-465-4940.